10 ghost towns from around the world. For various reasons, most of which are none too pleasant, many villages, towns and cities around the world have been abandoned and today linger on as deserted reminders of yesteryear. Visits to some of these places aren't even possible for either political or safety reasons, but if you do manage to get into any of them, it is about as close as you will ever come to traveling back in time. It is literally as if the clocks have stopped and over time nature has recovered what was once a thriving human settlement. When the specials released Ghost Town in 1981, they were referring to depressing British towns in a state of urban decay. However, the likes of Coventry, where the band originate from, are positively buzzing compared to this lot. 1. Pripyat, Ukraine. Constructed in 1970 primarily to house workers at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, Pripyat's unremarkable existence was to be incredibly short-lived. The population had risen to around 50,000 by 1986 when disaster struck the Soviet town. On the 26th April, fire and explosions at the nuclear plant led to a radioactive disaster on a scale never seen before. 31 people died in the accident itself, but many times that have succumbed since as a result of the after effects of the disaster. Although part of the Soviet Union at the time, Pripyat is situated in northern Ukraine, just a few miles south of Belarus, which has sadly borne the brunt of the after effects of the disaster. The exact number of cancers and other resulting deformities are still being accounted for. Today, nobody lives in Pripyat anymore. Indeed, it has now been a ghost town for a longer period of time than the 16 years it was inhabited. A few people have returned to photograph the town and conduct experiments to investigate the current levels of radiation, and there are now even companies offering tour guides of the deserted town. Eerie images of the rustic Ferris wheel and swimming pool, pictured above, have surfaced over the past few years, but Pripyat looks set to remain in its current state well into the distant future. This is arguably the most well-known of our 10 ghost towns around the world. 2. Plymouth, Montserrat. The Caribbean island of Montserrat was changed forever once Soufriere Hills volcano started erupting in 1995. The volcano, which had previously been dormant for more than a century, has remained active ever since. The capital Plymouth was hit by deadly pyroclastic flows and was eventually fully evacuated in 1997. Roughly two-thirds of the island's population has since been forced into emigration, although the northern part of the island remains safe enough to live. Today, Plymouth is now covered in volcanic ash and is still considered far too dangerous for anyone to set foot in. The village of Braids, outside the exclusion zone which covers most of the island, has been made the new capital. 3. Krakow, Italy. Possibly the most picturesque on this list, Krakow in southern Italy was abandoned in 1963 due to the threat of landslides. The town was founded by monks and previously had a history dating back around 1,000 years and was a site of religious significance with numerous ancient churches. It also hosted many important festivals through the year which attracted lots of pilgrims. Today, people still live in Krakow, although not in its grumbling old town, which remains a popular setting for filmmakers. The Passion of the Christ, Saving Grace and Quantum of Solace are amongst a number of movies that featured scenes in the town. It is protected by the World Monuments Fund, so unlike other ghost towns that have been left to rot, some efforts to maintain it are being made. 4. Varosha, Cyprus. Cyprus is best known as a popular holiday destination for Europeans, and the district of Varosha in Famagusta was perhaps the island's most popular resort in the early 1970s. However, all that was to change when Turkish forces invaded in 1974 and claimed the northern part of the island. Clashes on the streets of Famagusta led to residents quickly fleeing the conflict, and Varashore was abandoned, eventually falling just on the Turkish side of the dividing line. Turkish forces fenced it off, and nothing has changed there in 40 years. Today, Turkish soldiers still have orders to shoot on sight anyone who tries to enter the area. Nobody lives there, and understandably nobody goes there. This is a classic case of nature reclaiming land once inhabited by people. There are even a number of sea turtles who have decided to nest there. There are sporadic attempts to resolve the situation, but so much time has passed it seems unlikely that any of the original residents will ever return to their former streets and homes. 5. Pyramiden, Norway. Deep within the Arctic Circle lies the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard. This place is extraordinarily cold, and between 26 October and 15 February the polar night descends, leaving the area in darkness for over 3 months. The town of Pyramiden was founded by Sweden in 1910 as a coal mining community before being sold to the Soviet Union a couple of decades later. It remained active up until 1998, when it was finally shut down for good. Today, only a couple of thousand people live in Svalbard, and some coal mining does still go on, but Pyramiden has been abandoned. It is possible to visit the ghost town, although you aren't allowed to enter the buildings without permission. In 2013 a hotel was opened up, meaning you can stay overnight. Fascinatingly, it is also home to the world's northernmost piano. The future is surprisingly bright for the buildings of Pyramiden, with scientists predicting that due to the freezing conditions, the buildings will stand the test of time and are likely to still be in decent condition many centuries from now. 6. Kolmanskop, Namibia. Kolmanskop has been a ghost town since 1954, yet in the early part of the 20th century it was a small but thriving diamond mining town. The chance discovery of a diamond in the area in 1908 attracted many German miners to the region. In the desert, they constructed a village in typical German style and lived a life of luxury on the back of their finds. A theater, casino and even a bowling alley were built, and although the town's heyday was to be short-lived, residents here enjoyed their lavish surroundings. After World War I the diamond market crashed and the town declined until it was finally deserted less than 50 years after its formation. Today, it is a popular tourist destination and some buildings have been expertly restored. Other parts of the town have literally sank into the desert and you have to wade through thick layers of sand to enter the buildings. It is another town to have been featured in films and TV shows. 7. Nami, Futaba, Tomioka, and Okuma, Japan. Following the devastating earthquake, tsunami and subsequent nuclear disaster at Fukushima in 2011, a 20 km exclusion zone, which included several medium-sized towns, was drawn up around the power plant. This led to the evacuation of around 300,000 people, many of whom were already grief-stricken following the death of friends and family members. Today, thousands of people are still living in temporary housing and are allowed to return to their homes, but only for very short periods, a few hours per month. The towns of Nami, Futaba, Tomioka and Okuma are essentially ghost towns. While the destruction from the tsunami is clearly visible in some areas, other parts on the face of it look like normal urban streets, only there are no people. The threat of radiation is still deemed far too high for residents to return permanently, but plans to move 400 tons of uranium rods from the reactor to a less dangerous location could eventually see these towns become inhabited again. 8. Agdam, Azerbaijan. One of the most shocking yet least well-known ghost towns is the city of Agdam in Azerbaijan. It was once home to over 100,000 people but fell into a state of ruin during the bloody Nagorno-Karabakh War when it was occupied by Armenian forces. As the city fell in 1993, almost the entire town's population were forced to flee to the east, and although it was eventually returned to Azerbaijani rule, there was so little of it left that very few residents returned and instead settled in other parts of the country. Today, the city resembles a large derelict building site. In short, it's a very depressing place. The Agdam Mosque is about the only thing still standing, although even that is in a fairly dire condition. Even the town's football team, one of the most successful in the country, moved to thriving Baku, but it still carries the name of its original home. The war has long since finished, but it seems extremely unlikely that they or any of the evacuees will ever permanently return to their former home. 9. Potosi, Venezuela. Possibly the most ridiculous story on this top 10 list comes from Venezuela. In 1985, then-President Carlos Andrés Pérez flew into Potosi, a small town of over 1,000 residents, on his helicopter, ordering its full evacuation. The reason? He wanted to flood it in order to build a hydroelectric dam. And he wasn't joking. Shortly after the evacuation, the entire town was underwater and only the steeple of the 26-meter church was visible. Today, after 25 years underwater, a sudden drought in 2010 saw the reservoir shrink and the remains of the town re-emerge. Many of the original residents were stunned to get the first glimpse of their old town in a quarter of a century, although unsurprisingly very little was left of it besides the wall of the church and ruins of houses. 10. Hashima Island, Japan. Hashima Island was a coal mining facility which opened in the late 19th century. The small island near Nagasaki in southern Japan housed over 5,000 workers in many multi-story apartment blocks. At its peak there were 12 round-trip boat services a day from the mainland to densely populated Hashima, which played an important role in the industrialization of Japan. However, the familiar tale of the closing down of coal mines across the developed world in the 1970s and 80s claimed another victim here. With little other purpose, the island was abandoned in 1974 and was simply left to rot away. Today, travel to the island was only officially re-established in 2009, some 35 years after anyone had been allowed to set foot there. Most of Hashima is still off-limits, and it would require an enormous, and unlikely, investment to ensure the safety of the buildings. A small corner of the island is open to visitors who reportedly are flocking to take a peek into what was once a busy and important island. The second Japanese entry on our list was the inspiration for a long scene in the 2012 James Bond film, Skyfall, although filming didn't take place on the island itself.